Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Inside R&D, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the innovation shaping the future of media and technology. As we continue celebrating 93 years of BBC R&D's impact, we're reconnecting with the brilliant minds who helped guide its direction and define its legacy. In this episode, I'm joined by Jon Page, former head of technology strategy at BBC R&D. Jon always brings a unique blend of strategic thinking and creative problem solving to his work. We explored some of his past projects and what it means to see innovation recognised. How did it feel to see that BBC R&D had their work recognised with another Emmy?
Another Emmy. Awesome. I think it was really good. I mean, I've been around long enough that I've seen several Emmys over time for different things that we've done. But that one for the department felt special and different because it wasn't just a recognition of a thing and an awesome piece of work. It was a recognition of the department as a whole and its role in our industry and things like that. And of course, you know, for myself, having sort of been part of the team running it for a few years, I kind of had a bit of personal pride. So I loved it. It was great.
I mean, obviously, there have been a few for specific projects. Were you surprised for BBC R&D to receive this kind of an award more for the general impact it's had on the industry, or did you see it coming? Did you think, you have confidence in the department?
To be absolutely honest, I didn't know they did that kind of thing, so I didn't see it coming. But I think it's well deserved. I mean, had I known that it existed, I would have expected us to have earned it before, because the contributions that we've made to our industry over nearly 100 years has been extraordinary. And so it's kind of without sort of sounding sort of overly full of ourselves as a department, I think it reflects what we're for and what we do. And if you look at our charter requirements about pushing the edge of technology and innovation for the good of industry, it's exactly the kind of thing we should be winning, and I'm so pleased that we did.
So when you look back at your time at BBC R&D, is there any particular project or piece of work that first comes to mind when you heard that this Emmy was awarded?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I'll mention a couple of projects, but there's one big overriding theme, which, if I look over the time that I was in R&D and before, really show how R&D it deserves this kind of award, and that is about, the theme is about the internet. So the internet has been something that's changed our world. It's changed all of our lives individually, and it's changed the industry as a whole. And what BBC R&D does really effectively is it looks very early at emerging technologies, emerging concepts, long before there's commercial potential. And it tries to work out what that might mean, both at the detailed level, how we make things, and also at an industry level and a society level, how that's going to change things. And so years before I started, I think I started in R&D maybe 13 years ago now, some of the folk who were there before me had been thinking quite hard about what the internet is going to do us. And of course, we already had the iPlayer and we already had things like that. But there were two threads that I would point to. One is, and I'm going to say something technical now, SMPTE 2110. But this is the way in which plain old computers and the internet can be brought together to deliver something very specific around the production of media content. And historically, the production of media content was done by specific, highly bespoke devices connected together in highly bespoke ways with highly bespoke wires. And what BBC R&D did before anybody else really thought it was a good thing to work on was to say, well, this is one day just going to be other computers on the internet. And if that's true, how will it work? And it probably spent, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, if you count some of the really early work, just working that out. before anybody else knew it was a problem that needed to be solved. So that as this technology matured, we were in a position to say to the industry, we've actually worked this out now. We've got a working version. We did it with the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, and we can show you how this will work end to end. And we could take manufacturers around the world into our offices and show them something working end to end and persuade them that the way that we had worked out how to do it was the right way. And it wasn't the right way because it was our devices, and it wasn't the right way because it was going to make us lots of money. It was the right way because us as public servants in our industry, trying to make our industry work, it was right for us to use. And that's what the industry wanted. The industry wanted something they could rely on to use. And so we then worked with the industry to help them work out how to implement that in their own products, which ultimately, many years later, we were able to buy to build our new broadcasting house in Cardiff. And that's an extraordinary piece of work. And it was only done because of the foresight of the team and the capability of the team in doing that kind of thing. And the other half of the equation of the internet, which is us as consumers, using the internet to consume our content, streaming, etc., is the journey that we've been through Freeview Play, and now Freely, which are all variations of how we bring the best of internet-based streaming capability to everybody in the country. Going to our universal mission. So not just the folk who are kind of a bit technology smart who want to find the best way of finding the latest streaming services, but everybody in the country who wants to, with a simple remote control press of their button, access those services. So these connected devices, which started looking like catch up and now in Freely look like everybody's experience of finding the next thing to consume or whatever, either inside your television set or on a stick that's connected to your television set. And again, the people in BBC R&D, they're already thinking about the thing that's going to come after Freely and the thing that's going to come after that, and working out how that might work. So that as the market continues, we can continue to give all of our audiences the best of experiences that are available. And I think it's that thing about the internet has happened and changed our world. The reason why the BBC and media in general is doing so well in that, in a big way, is down to the work of my colleagues in BBC R&D.
You oversaw a lot of really sort of important work that's happened in, as you say, your career in R&D spanned 13 years. But before that, you had a equally interesting build-up to becoming, leading transformation at the BBC. Before that, from corporate innovation to venture capital. So where does this love of innovation come from?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's there. I often say I live in 5 years' time. So I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by how technologies can be used to change our experience of the world, etc. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about it and looking at it, and so consequently, I kind of always vaguely believe that the world is already where it's going to get to in about 5 years' time, and innovation is this process, this approach of taking what new technology insights and advances can make possible and turning those things into things that happen. And things happen because they're possible and because they're good for the users of that technology or the users of that product and service. And so part of this sort of technology-based innovation is working out which kinds of technologies, which kinds of in technical innovations make sense in a real world application, and then what needs to happen in order for that to happen. And frequently, and this is going back to my venture capital experience, that's an inherently commercial process, because you have to attract people who are going to spend their careers making it happen, who want to make money, etc. You have to attract money who wants to get a return on their investment. And then you have to attract everybody else in the kind of the value chain, the people who are required to make any product or service actually exist in the market. They all have to come together and be as excited about this innovation as you are, perhaps, as the originator of it. And bringing all of that together there's so many dimensions to it. And every case, every time you do it, it's slightly different. So it's its own little puzzle. There's patterns, there's things that get repeated. But the end point is, when you get it right, a better world in some way. And so all of this effort, all of this endeavor is about making a better world. And that's why being in coming over to BBC R&D was such a exciting thing for me, because sometimes a better world might be, there's a product over here that's making a whole bunch of people a whole lot of money. That's great. BBC R&D, with its public purposes, with its role in society, that better world is better for us all in some way. And that's worth my getting out of bed for.
So how did that kind of mind frame help kind of inform the way that you led the strategy within BBC R&D?
I'm going to be brutally honest here. So I think I frequently saw myself as following the insights of my colleagues as opposed to leading what was being done. So my colleagues who led each of the strands of research, they're the people who properly understood what was going on in their domain, properly understood what was possible and how to make it work. And so I saw my role, because I'm no longer doing this, but I saw my role as bringing together a coherent story, a coherent set of things that we're working on, and working with them to work out how best to land the impact of their technology. Sometimes that meant pushing them a little. Sometimes that meant looking outside the organization and helping get things in. But mostly it involved listening and asking questions. So mostly that kind of thing is about harnessing the innovators' insights, the originators of these ideas, their knowledge, and helping them to be as successful as they can be in the market. And I learned that before I came to the BBC, when I was working in the universities. So I would be working with a professor who was developing new therapeutic concepts for COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, really nasty thing. And this professor really knew his stuff. There was no way I was going to tell him about strategies for solving those kinds of diseases, but I could help him work out how to interface with the venture capital industry and other parts of the industry in order to build a business that would successfully take his drugs forward and therefore make people better, save lives. And it's that approach, I think, of being able to talk credibly with world leaders in their domain, understand enough of what they're doing. You can't just wave your hands around and understand in principle about the benefits. You have to understand enough about what they're doing, understand enough about the context of the market in which they're going to land, and then understand enough about the process by which you take potential and turn it into reality. I think the other interesting thing about what I saw in BBC R&D between when I started and kind of when I left was, when I started, we were very much stepping outside this walled garden where it'd been very comfortable for 50, 60 years. So as a special industry, that thing I was talking about moving to the internet, when it was bespoke kit with bespoke wires and bespoke approaches to doing things, we were the biggest beast in the jungle, or at least we were a very big beast. And so what we said really mattered. Where we are now is we are just a use case. We're just one of the users of cloud services, of the internet per se, et cetera, et cetera. We are not the biggest beast in that jungle by any stretch of the imagination. So that approach, that need to understand the market and the technological context into which you're trying to land your innovation, suddenly becomes something that was harder. because we're dealing with people who got entirely different business models and entirely different priorities. And from my days back in Imperial, I was used to that, because everybody was dealing in unknown territories all the time. And so being able to get comfortable in those as quickly as you can was quite important.
During your tenure, can you remember of any specific projects during that time that really embodied kind of the venture capital mindset and the public service?
So yes, there's a project that I did towards the tail end of my time was actually working with an entrepreneurial business that had venture capital backing. And we were looking at that to try and understand and test ideas for new services that were inherently of kind of internet, interactive, immersive experiences. And so we were looking for opportunities to test how those might work for our audiences. And so we found an organization who had recently been backed with venture capital money, who was producing this means by which you could capture live performances and then recreate them in a virtual environment. Back in the day, a few years ago, people used to talk about the idea of a metaverse. It's that kind of virtual environment, captured live, streamed live, with which audiences could interact and enjoy. And I think the interesting thing is, I remember going back about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even 8 or 9 years ago, talking about that as an idea. That is the kind of thing that the internet might make possible. And we talked about how the role that might have strategically. But it was only when we started this project that finally the capability of technology, the devices we all carry, the internet itself, was capable of doing the things that we had imagined. Going back to the thing about R&D, being ahead of the curve, thinking before things are commercial. Finally, it was commercial. And so we wanted to work with this startup company, but we had to work with it in a way that was consistent with an entrepreneurial business, moving at pace and changing its mind from time to time in a good way. In entrepreneurial land, they talk about pivoting, which is basically when your ideas hit the market and you realize either you've got it wrong or there's a better idea out there. And you don't just plow ahead and do what you were doing in the first place. You say, actually, there's a better thing we can do here. Let's pivot towards it and do that. And that's the kind of thing that we did in this project. So we hit the project first of all. I found myself having the shivers of memory, going back to some of the basic technology stuff I'd done in Imperial, when it hits the market and you realize some of the things you thought would work don't work. And so you have to very quickly work out whether you can fix them or not. And if you can't fix them, what you do differently and still have a successful business. So there was a little bit of that. But also the form factor of the way that you experience this changed. So the organization we'd worked with had worked with gamers mostly, gamers with gaming computers and services around those that made it really easy to consume these immersive experiences. But we're the BBC, and so we're interested in universal experiences. And so one of the conversations we had with them over those early years was how we actually get something that would take a high-spec gaming computer over kind of, sort of really good internet connectivity and make it work with somebody with a fairly basic mobile phone wandering around. And at first that seemed outrageous. But then interestingly for the group we were working with, there was a moment where they went, wow, actually, do you know what? If we can do that, we've just gone from a market that's yay to a market that's yay. And so for them as a business, that suddenly started to become quite interesting. So together, we then started to really focus on trying to create these experiences so that when you tuned into Radio 1 on a Thursday night, the DJ could say, and now, he used the word metaverse at the time, and now in the metaverse, you can go and see this band perform. Click this button. And so people across the country were clicking on the button, and in their phone appeared a photorealistic 360-degree representation of the artists as they were performing in Maida Vale in our facilities. And so we did that several times. So we did that. We did that to, first of all, test to see if the thing worked. And there's more people enjoyed it. We did bigger events. And in the end, we ended up doing kind of sort of rave evenings, had 4 or 5 DJs, one after another, hundreds of people turning up, dancing on the dance stage, jumping around, doing all sorts of strange things. And we even managed to take it to outside gigs. So we took it to the big weekend and we took it into a field, which nobody thought was possible. We did have to turn the smoke off, but apart from that, it worked beautifully. And so what we were able to do there is we were able to take this entrepreneurially developed technology right to the cutting edge of capability. Before we started working with them, we reviewed the market. There was only one organization we found who could do the kind of thing we wanted to do, and it was them, right at the cutting edge of capability. And then we could put that in front of our audiences, and we could sort of test, how does this work? How does it fit with our audiences? How do they behave when they're put in this environment? What kinds of things, once you made the technology work, do you do that make it goodness me, I have to come to the next one, the sort of version and experience. And so that kind of felt quite entrepreneurial. It also felt entrepreneurial because we're on a really tight budget, both us and them. This isn't the kind of thing where you just say, let's throw everything at it with money. You say, okay, let's run this as if we're a startup. We've got a decent amount of money, but only a decent amount of money. So we've got to keep hitting our milestones. We've got to keep showing value so that we can attract more money, both of the startup, for them to keep going, and for ourselves to think we're going to keep going with this. And so I think over the last few weeks, this is after I left, I've been loving jumping into LinkedIn and seeing my colleagues walking onto stage after stage, picking up awards for that delivery. Superb.
So BBC R&D it's been shaping broadcasting for over 93 years now, and obviously recognised with its latest Emmy. So from your perspective, what will be the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity for the next 93 years of BBC R&D?
93 is quite a long way to look forward into the future. I'm going to say AI. Of course, I'm going to say AI. That's in our faces. It's real. It's present, and it is promising to change an awful lot in a very similar way to the way in which the internet changed an awful lot. So I talked about production processes and our experience of the internet, our experience of content. That is going to change the way stuff's made. It's going to, and it is already changing the way stuff's made. Come on, we all see it every day. Content being made, tools being improved through the application of AI. That's going to keep on going. Also importantly, it will increasingly become an intermediary between us and audiences, between audience members and what it is they're looking for. You only have to Google to see how AI suddenly stands between you and what traditionally used to be your shopping menu of things to look at. So these things are already in our faces. Good thing, BBC R&D has been looking at this for probably a decade now. I remember seeing GPT, whichever version it was, about 5 or 6 years before that moment when the whole world turned around and looked at it. And I remember us doing demonstrations of sort of deep fake kinds of capabilities, whereby you could take a mask of a person and get them to kind of speak news that was just typed in by another person sitting next to them, as opposed to what the individual said in the first place. So we've been working on those. Those will change. Those will change everything. They will change all sorts of aspects to our lives, which then brings me back to the kind of the other thing that I think is so important about what BBC R&D does, which goes back to the whole purpose of the BBC in the first place. Very old history lesson. So when the BBC was founded, and it was founded as radio, this strange new capability existed, and it was in all sorts of people's hands, and people were making content and listening to content independently. In the UK, sort of that nationally we realized that this new experience, this new media experience was going to be important in the country. And we wanted it to exist in the way that it was good for the whole of society. We wanted it to exist as a public service, and hence the idea of a limited number of licenses for broadcasting content. That's where we kind of all started for. And it was an attempt to take new technology that was going to seep into everybody's life and get it to exist in such a way that added value to society. AI is the same thing. Now, I don't think we're going to have an AI license, which means there's only one AI provider. That's not viable. But the job of the BBC to ensure that as new markets arise, that they are fit for public service, that products and services exist in them that are exemplary in capability, that fulfill our inform, educate, and entertain kind of requirements, but also are industrially structured so that they work for public service is critical. And I know, and I dearly miss my colleagues who are working hard on what that actually means, what we need to do to make this industry exist in a way that's going to work for us all. And I think that's not a 3 or 4 year journey. That's gonna be 5 years, 10 years, as that rolls out. That will build this new substrate. So if you had radio frequency over the airwaves for sound, radio frequency over the airwaves for audio and visual, then you had content over networks called the internet. Now the propagation of content through artificial intelligence is another way in which kind of we're going to act. We're going to live our lives, and the BBC is going to make our lives better for the work that BBC R&D does. I hope.
So, what piece of advice would you give your colleagues or former colleagues who are now working tirelessly to achieve that?
You're right. Keep going.
Thank you, as always, for listening to Inside R&D. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favourite platform so you never miss what's coming next. Please also like, rate, and follow depending on where you listen, as it really helps the podcast reach more curious minds. If you want to learn more about the things we spoke about today, check out the links in the description or visit the BBC R&D website. Thank you to the team of people I have supporting me and helping to make this podcast a reality. I've been your host, Joseph Turner, and I'm looking forward to having you back for the next conversation in this commemorative series. Until then, take care, be curious, and stay innovative.